It goes to show the greatest team of all. It's Celtic first and Celtic last and Celtic overall.
Jock Stein had set standards and raised expectations. He embraced and enhanced Celtic's attack-minded traditions. In season 1966-67, Celtic were as unstoppable as they were irresistible. Coupling industry and invention, the Hoops were an exhilarating attacking force, a footballing whirlwind, beautiful and beguiling to watch, but capable of destroying all in its path. Season 66-67 would see Celtic rewrite football history. Despite the challenge of the strong Rangers, the boys retained the League Cup and would lose just 2 games to claim their second successive championship in impressive fashion. The Hoops would underline their domestic dominance by claiming their first ever treble when Aberdeen were defeated 2-0 in the Scottish Cup final. This domestic success was extraordinary enough, but it was on the continent that the Hoops would make an eternal mark. Celtic had made their European bow in 1962 when they were knocked out in the first round of the Intercity Fairs Cup to Valencia. Now, competing in the European Cup for the first time, the Glasgow club had become the first British side to reach the final of the continent's premier tournament. The champions of Switzerland, France, Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia swept aside as Stein's men marched to a final. Awaiting them, on May the 25th, in Lisbon's Estadio Nacional, were the mighty Inter Milan. Bankrolled by oil billionaire Angelo Moratti, with the Mercurio Helenio Herrera at the helm, Inter had become the dominant force both in Italy and Europe. Between 1961 and 67, the Milanese side had won 3 league titles, 2 European Cups and 2 Intercontinental Cups. Despite these successes, Inter had won few friends with their defensive, derided Catenaccio football. But these footballing aristocrats would meet their match in the team from Glasgow's East End. Celtic were a club with humble origins, but they now had a team that inspired endless ambition. And what a team it was. In goal was a veteran Ronnie Simpson. Ironically, the keeper had been sold to Celtic by Stein when in charge of Hibs, but at Parkhead, the manager recognised the value of this solid and dependable performer. The Hoops' defence was marshalled by the magnificent Billy McNeill, a strong and commanding centre-half. A born leader, McNeill was a wholehearted Celt who always led by example. Beside him, the unsung John Clark, cool, composed and ever reliable. Jim Craig provided energy and industry at right full-back, while on the other flank was Tommy Gemmell, a confident, marauding full-back with a steely determination and a thunderbolt shot. In the middle of the park was Bertie Auld. A player in his second spell at the club, Auld was tough, tenacious and fiercely competitive, but by God, he could play football. In tandem with Bertie was the sublime Bobby Murdoch. A player made from Scottish steel, Murdoch was blessed with wonderful touch and vision. He was the heartbeat of the team, a complete footballer. At outside left, Bobby Lennox, an electrifying presence. With an abundance of pace and skill, he simply terrorised defences. Then, there was a man known simply as Jinky. Few men lit up a football field like the wee red-haired figure of Jimmy Johnston. This wonder of a wing possessed a natural ability which mesmerised supporters and opponents alike. His darting, twisting runs would wreak havoc in defences and have fans roaring in delight. Fearless, gutsy, and simply the greatest, Johnston enthralled and inspired. Thriving on the service from such wonderful talent was Stevie Chalmers, a hard-working, selfless striker who possessed great awareness and was a fine finisher. Beside Chalmers was Willie Wallace, a recent signing from Hearts. Wallace was a wonderful natural goal scorer and a tireless competitor. Sean Fallon would provide reliable backup for Simpson, while throughout the season, John Hughes, Charlie Gallagher and Willie O'Neill provided notable contributions to an unforgettable season. So too did the unfortunate Joe McBride, a phenomenal goal scorer. McBride smashed 36 goals before Christmas, only for a cruel injury to end his campaign. This was a team packed with incredible individual talent, but it was so much more than a collection of talented individuals. The players were all born within the west of Scotland, and together they demonstrated a collective character which simply refused to be bullied, intimidated or defeated. Back in Lisbon, and with minutes remaining to kick off, the two teams were standing together in the tunnel, waiting to enter the arena. The Celtic players couldn't help but be impressed by their opponents. Athletic and tanned, they looked every inch the footballing sophisticates. For all the Hoops' domestic dominance that season, it paled into insignificance in comparison to the achievements of these men who had conquered Europe and the world. Bertie Auld's response to this moment of apprehension would go down in Celtic folklore. His leading of the players in singing the Celtic song as they began the long walk up the tunnel sent not just a message of defiance to Inter, but one of inspiration to Celtic. When the players emerged from the tunnel, the Celtic players appeared blinking in the sunshine like miners emerging from the bowels of the earth after another shift in the darkness. Stein, who followed his boys out of the tunnel, would have been forgiven for thinking back to his days as a collier. He'd come a long way, from toiling underground at Ernott Pit to guiding Celtic to the summit of European football. He was close to completing a most remarkable journey. What happened over the next 90 minutes is written in the heart of every Celtic fan, indeed of everyone who appreciates and loves attacking football. Stein and Celtic did not defeat Inter, they destroyed them. The scoreline was 2-1, but the reality was that this was a beating which left Inter and Herrera battered and broken. Catenaccio was savaged by what Big Jock described as pure, beautiful, inventive football. Inter had taken the lead with an early penalty, but what followed was a footballing onslaught. Gemble's fine equalising strike was of course followed by Chalmers' late winner. It was a goal which brought justice and booked Celtic's seat among football's elite. The image of a sweat-soaked, sunbathed Billy McNeill hoisting aloft the European Cup has become a treasured icon to Celtic supporters. It remains the finest achievement in Scottish sporting history. Later that year, the Hoops suffered a controversial defeat over 3 games in the World Club Championship. The nature of defeat to the South American champions Racing Club would rankle. Over 3 matches, Celtic were ground down by the brutal thuggery of the Argentine opponents, who eventually triumphed in a bad-tempered playoff decider in Uruguay. But despite the initial anger and disappointment, this was but a minor setback, as Stein's imperious Celtic continued to dominate Scottish football. In season 67-68, the Hoops recovered from the shock of an early European Cup exit to Dynamo Kiev to claim yet another League and League Cup double. The following campaign, they went one better, stealing a second domestic treble in 3 seasons with a 4-0 humiliation of Rangers at Hampden in the Scottish Cup final. As 1970 approached, Celtic fans would look back on the most remarkable and successful years in the club's rich and honour-laden history. But there was little time to dwell on these achievements. It was already clear the manager was nurturing a new crop of talented youngsters. Jock Stein had took a club with a wonderful past but a difficult present, and had given them a great future. He proved to the Celtic support that their team could be the greatest. It was a lesson they never forgot. The achievements of the late 60s were astonishing, but as 1970 approached, Celtic fans were not yet ready to consign such days to the history book.
And in this day and age, when people say about how many games you have to play to win the European Cup or the Champions League or whatever, and all these seeded rounds, and there's so much to do to get into the Champions League final, but the quality of the teams that Celtic played on the way to Lisbon was actually very, very high. And don't let anybody tell you anything different to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think because European football evolves, and people will say, Vojvodina, who are Vojvodina? They're not a big name these days. Likes that Dukla Prague as well. These teams were absolutely top teams at the time, and as you say, don't let anyone tell you any differently. Even FC Zurich had some real star names, and
they had 10 internationals.
Absolutely, and as well, I mean, what shouldn't be forgotten about back then as well is that unlike these days, which maybe younger fans might forget, is that it was only the champions then. It was only, so you were playing the French champions, the Swiss champions, the Yugoslav champions, whatever team you were playing against weren't the team that finished fourth. They were the champions, and they were the best in their country, and that was it. It was the absolute creme de la creme of European football. And to go up, and I mean, Inter, people as well kind of almost demean Inter. They say that Inter were a spent force by 67. They still had 4 players who played in the 1970 World Cup final.
Yeah.
4 years, it's in 1970, so
that's right.
they can't have been that much of a spent force, and that's the thing. I think there's a lot of maybe historical revisionism going on with certain things, and as I say, because some of the teams aren't big names these days, it's said, they didn't beat any massive teams on the route to the final. In those days, those teams were absolutely huge and the best of it around, and this was a lot of the Soviet teams especially, aren't maybe the powers they once were, which is a real shame, I think. A lot of these great Eastern names have disappeared, and it's just part of the way football's gone, but in those days it was, they had such a tough route to the final, and they had to fight in every round, you saw that.
Absolutely. I mean, so they defeated Zurich, obviously, in the first round, Nantes in the second round, Vojvodina in the quarter-finals. But it was the semi-finals, I think, against Dukla Prague, where the worth of Jock Stein really abounded. Because after Celtic being 3-1 up from the first leg, they had to go away and get a result. And this is the difference, I think, from what we were saying earlier on about the time when they played in the Cup Winners' Cup semi-final, where it was still, the match is won, but we still go out and attack. That's not what happened in the second leg.
No, not at all. And it wasn't something that either the players or Jock Stein was proud of, and he said afterwards that we'd never play that way again. And he didn't. I mean, there were times where, again, he was slightly defensive in Europe. You would say, well, not as defensive as they were in Prague, because it was the old, parking the bus, really. It was in Prague, and it just wasn't the way Celtic played. And but it got the end justified the means, I suppose, that day. But it wasn't something he was proud of, and he didn't feel it was the best way to go about it. So you would see in future years, when they went to play in Italy, he would maybe bring in a holding midfielder, which again was quite revolutionary at that time, and he would make little changes to make Celtic slightly more defensive, maybe play John Hughes in a kind of floating role. John Hughes came on to a really good game later in that decade, and again, that was quite seen as defensive by Celtic standards, but not as defensive as they'd been in Prague. I don't think they were ever purposefully as defensive again. I think I know they said there was one game against Ajax away where they were really quite defensive and it backfired. That was, later on. But he wasn't happy with the way they played. But it was, I think, a direct result of what had happened against MTK Budapest, that they had seen what can happen with these leads where you're on the verge of something great, but all it takes is one goal and things start unravelling. And again, they had great players to Club Prague, and he knew that the players would maybe remember just subconsciously if things started falling apart. You'd a lot of survivors of that MTK game, so they would maybe start remembering if things started falling apart. So I think that really, it came from that previous semi-final, and maybe a bit from the Liverpool game as well, even though that was just bad luck as much as anything and poor refereeing. I think it was a hangover from those two. It was just, let's just get the job done, which is make sure we're in the final, and that's what they did. And the result speaks for itself. They got through. If Celtic did that these days, you'd be shouting from the rooftops and you'd be praising to heaven for a display of tactical brilliance. So it was quite strange for them to come out and almost be apologising for it, which
to a man, to everybody apologised.
We seek him here, we seek him there.
Family, faith and football, it is probably the biggest part of my life. It's what apart from faith and family, it is what I do. It's my social life. It's what I do with my family. It's what we talk about. It's so it just really is. And a season or two ago, when we were all worried about what was going to happen and whether there was going to be a complete decimation of the integrity of the league, and I realise that matter isn't decided yet, but I definitely, last season, was not going to renew my season ticket if they had allowed that other club to come back in, to be in the SPL, the new club, and at that point I was really had a knot in my stomach the whole summer, because I simply didn't know how I was going to be spending my time, so I was really anxious about that. So that's what it means to me. It is what I do, it's what I think about, it's what I picture doing, when I retire, which I'm very much looking forward to. It's a while yet, and I think about all the places I'll go and that sort of thing. So that is just part of my life.
In all the towns like Donegal or Marseille, Glasgow town is where he's bound to watch the famous hoops, 'cause he's a dedicated follower of Celtic.
So Johnny, best of a Celtic goal?
Too many. Any Larson, Mrachik, loads of goals, but the ones I really enjoyed most were probably the goals against Liverpool at Anfield. It's just the road to Seville.
Alan Thompson, John
Hartson, yeah.
I won a few bob in that Alan Thompson free kick.
Pretty good.
That sticks in my memory. No, but they were two crackers.
It was just a great night.
Brilliant. Were you at the game?
I was at that game.
Oh, yeah. Superb, man.
The Lisbon Lions with big Jock Stein.
My favourite trophy that the Celtic I've won in my time being a fan is probably the Scottish Cup in 94-95 with Tommy Burns being the man in charge at the time. We'd went a wee wait for silverware, and it was, I don't know, it was tense times, tough times being a Celtic fan back then, but I always remember the goal. I'll probably take the visions of the goal to my grave. It was a tense game against Airdrie, and Tosh McKinley picks up the ball and he delivers the sweetest cross you'll ever likely to see, and Big Pierre popped up and done the rest, and the trophy ended up back at Celtic Park. Things that I miss that doesn't happen nowadays is you would get on the train back to Belgrove and they sing songs on the train and and all that. You don't get that these days, but hopefully, I'm not saying they'll return, but I'll leave it at that.
So that brings us on to the 25th of May 1967, and to be honest with you, Steve, I don't know what we could add that hasn't already been said about the 25th of May 1967, apart from maybe the fact that I didn't see it live because I wasn't born, and I know you didn't see it live because you weren't born either.
No.
So
Absolutely.
For us to actually talk about this in 40 odd years into the future, all I can say to you is that everything that I've known about Celtic and everything I've been told and brought up, and I'm sure you're very similar yourself, until you actually sit and watch the match, and sometimes it's difficult to sit and watch an old match, that happened sort of, a lot of years earlier. But see, when you watch the game, it's just how good this team was that it finally struck me when I saw the European Cup final.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there was a phrase at the time, one of the match reports was that Celtic annihilated them by a one goal match.
Yes, that's right.
And it's absolutely accurate when you look at the balance of play, and there was the interplayers by all accounts that when I think it was still one each, And obviously Sarti was having the game of his life.
Yeah.
And at one point he makes this fantastic save, and someone said that one of the defenders, came from within the intercamp, turned to Sarti and said, just give up. Yeah, it's going to happen. It's inevitable that Celtic are going to win this. They're just all over. It's just, stop resisting, basically. Which is just, when you think about Inter, who were just, they'd beaten Real Madrid on the route to the final. They were serial winners of the tournament. For that comment to be made shows just how Celtic just didn't give them a minute to breathe. And again, it was a performance of real tactical sophistication. This time, a very attacking performance, but the way that Stein basically sacrificed the likes of Chalmers and Johnson and Lennox to drag the Inter players. A lot of those guys said they didn't have their best game that day, but he was so pleased with them because they dragged the Inter defence everywhere, and they disrupted this great shape and this Catenaccio system. And then, of course, you get one full-back setting up the other for the goal, the equaliser, and then from then on, there was just seemed to be no doubt about it. And I know Sean was saying that even at half-time, there was real calm in the dressing room. They just felt that all it needed, they said the only worry was they would get a little bit frustrated because they were so on top, and this goalkeeper was having the game of his life. But this did seem to be a feeling that everything is going right here. All we need to do, I think there was the comment that Jock Stein made was, let's look to cut the ball back a bit more. Let's not have the crosses just going in the box. Let's look to get to the byline or get to the crossing areas and cut the ball back. And of course that pays dividends with the goals. So it was, the whole, as you say, it's hard to know what to add to it sometimes. And it's sacrilege, but I was telling you off air that in the book, it gets almost barely a chapter in Sean's book. I just thought, well, if I'm not seeing anything new, there's no point in me talking about, or Sean talking about how Bertie Auld was singing the Celtic song and the Inferno, or everyone knows these stories, unless
the trophy and all that kind of stuff. Everybody knows them. There's no point even talking about them.
Yeah, because Sean obviously had a fantastic view, literally, of the whole thing, because he brought Billy up to the cup, which was no mean feat in itself.
Yes.
Because obviously the pitch was absolutely swarming at that point, and so there was that little kind of experience to talk about, and little bits in terms of Herrera had tried to steal the bench before the match, the bench that was allocated to Celtic. So little bits like this you could talk about, but all the things everyone already knows. Great stories, in the tunnel, and looking at the handsome Italian players and their Colgate smiles, I think he said, and every player all giving their teeth to Ronnie Simpson and things. And they're great stories, but there's no point in going over them again. And so it seems, as I say, almost to have, I think it's got 26 chapters or something, and yet barely one is on Lisbon. And yet, that was my feeling, was that if you don't have anything fresh to add on it, don't go over the same old things that everyone knows and loves, but unless you can add something fresh.
The one thing I have learned about the final in Lisbon is that from doing these podcasts, I have to say, when we talked about the Celtic style, and then you talked about the Jimmy McGrory years where it was all fitness and no footballs to play with, and a medicine ball in the gym and all this here kind of stuff. But when you watch the final in Lisbon, two things jump off the screen at you. One, how skillful the players are, but also, secondly, how fit the team is, because that team came wave after wave after wave of attack, and it was relentless. So you actually had both those qualities in the team that won in Lisbon.
Absolutely, and that was the one thing I think that everyone gives Neil Mochan a lot of credit for, was he devised a fitness plan that made Celtic, people were saying, the fittest team in Europe, and that was another thing that gave Sean and Jock Stein a lot of comfort during the game, was they knew that if it came to late in the game, even in that heat, as hot as it was, they thought there's no way that this team is not going to be fitter than Inter. And the ability, as you say, was always there. It was just a case of getting that and getting them working as a team and getting them doing things in the right way and in the right system. Because funny enough, when Jock Stein came in, he didn't immediately go to the 4-2-4. He stuck to the 2-3-5 for quite a long time, the old, traditional WM setup. And it was only, I think, in when they went to Bermuda and the famous pre-season tour in USA, that he switched and he brought Bertie Auld back into this midfield role with Bobby Murdoch, which obviously was the platform, and everyone would say that from then on in, was that midfield gave Celtic the platform and the dominance and obviously Celtic never had a better midfield duo in the history than Auld and Murdoch. So you had this little subtle change again that just gave Celtic the platform to just go on that little step more. The change in formation, because that was just, the game was evolving, and Stein was a student of the game. And the funny thing was that he'd gone to study Herrera's methods, as you'll no doubt know, in the early 60s. And the thing he'd come back with, he didn't like how defensive it was, but he really admired the attacking fullbacks, the use of Facchetti for a Inter it was. But he thought, well, that's what I want to do, is bring, incorporate attacking fullbacks into my system. And it became Tommy Gemmell, Jim Craig for him, and obviously that was so crucial to undoing Inter, and yet that was where he learned it. He learned it from Herrera. What I hadn't maybe appreciated before researching Sean's story and speaking, Pat Woods has got a fantastic Lisbon collection, and it's full of foreign magazines, European magazines from around the world. It's just how significant it was worldwide. You always think of it as being something that was fantastic for us, but maybe, how significant was it really in world football? But the Catenaccio was hated, Inter were pretty much hated, and it was seen, even UEFA's General Secretary came out with a quote about how it's been the best thing to ever happen to football, and you think he's meant to be speaking of neutrality, and he's come out and said it was the best thing that ever happened to football at the time, and he said if Inter had won it would have put football back 10 years. And there's a fantastic quote which I've just left out here, it was in a French magazine, and it said, "Surely never in the history of world sport has a team created as many new fans as Celtic. Never has a victory been more warmly welcomed, nor a winning goal been greeted with such an explosion of joy throughout the continent." I mean, I just thought it's a nice thing to think of, to think that throughout Europe everyone was cheering this, and by all accounts as Celtic fans were making their way back from Lisbon in their winding journeys, wherever they would go through, they would be cheered in little towns because people had watched it and seen the way they'd won and seen that they'd kind of slayed this defensive beast, because it was a time of real tactical change in football. You'd had England winning the World Cup with the kind of wingless wonders, and everyone was wondering where football was going. Is this the future? Is it going to be Catenaccio and teams with no wingers? And yet then you have Celtic going to Lisbon and having guys like Jinky and just going at teams, and Bobby Lennox was pace, and just it was so important for football as a whole. And I think you've seen that the teams that came after it, the Ajaxes and these people, say that a lot of that was, the lead was taken from Celtic, that whatever was done in an attacking way. Jimmy Gribben, who was the scout at Celtic that day, that time, he stopped me and said, "Joe, what can I speak to you?" And then the next minute, Malcolm McDonald come down from the stand and says, "Oh, Jimmy, he's my player." But I hadn't even signed for Kilmarnock at that point. But they got me down in the very next day on the Sunday and signed me. And that was the first time that I'd known Celtic were kind of interested, Glasgow Celtic had 55 first-team games and had 54 goals. So that's the second highest ratio to Jimmy McGrory. Okay. Jimmy McGrory's got the highest ratio in Celtic's history. And I have the second highest ratio in Celtic's history. Henry Larsson's the third one. So it's good company I was in.
Obviously, Jock Stein signed you for £22,000, and that you were actually one of the first players Jock Stein signed for Celtic, right?
I was the first. I was the first player that Jock signed for Celtic after Jock came, and he brought me. I could have went to Dunfermline, and Dunfermline offered more money to Partick Thistle. No Partick Thistle, sorry, Motherwell. Dunfermline offered more money to Motherwell, and they offered more money to me to sign for them. But I wanted to go to Celtic, and that was quite a carry on. But however, eventually Motherwell relented and sold me to Celtic.
Is that because you grew up a Celtic fan, Joe? I know you were born and raised in Govan, but you're always a Celtic supporter, right?
Well,
Celtic supporter, and I was Player of the Year when I was with Motherwell this year we're talking about, and the dinner, the presentation dinner that I was getting presented with the Player of the Year thing, blah blah blah, and we're sitting in the hall in Motherwell where the reception was being held, and I'm sitting at the top table, and my manager Bertie Auld had just been appointed manager at Motherwell. He's sitting next to me, and I've been the Player of the Year, and this wee janitor of the hall, he walks right through all the tables, blah blah blah, right up to the top table, and he says, Joe, there's Sean Fallon on the phone for you. and Bobby Howard, who's just appointed manager of Motherwell, he's sitting, he went, you better go and answer that, you know. So when I was and Sean was saying, don't sign, Joe, don't sign, don't let him talk to you, we're coming in, we're gonna get you, you know, which he eventually did, you know. And I have no regrets. I always wanted to play for Celtic, and unfortunately I didn't get the length of time I wanted with them, you know. But the 3 years that I was there, 3.5 years, and one of them was just sitting on the sideline, you know. Yeah. But the other part, I couldn't have asked for any better. It was fabulous, you know.
What was it like to come to Celtic at that stage and actually, work for Jock Stein, Joe? Oh,
fabulous. I was lucky enough to join them at the time that Jock joined them. Jock had just joined them minutes before that. They went 14 years, I think. I'm not really sure, but I think that they had gone 14 years without winning a league, you know, before Jock joined, and I also joined. And the first league tournament there was, we won it. And they went on then to win it, 10 in a row? 9 in a row. 9 in a row. So it was a fabulous time to join a fabulous club under a fabulous manager, you know, and a fabulous playing, you know, all the boys were all the fabulous players. Every single one of them were superstars, you know.
So one of the most exciting things that still Celtic supporters talk about to this day in '65 was the European Cup Winners' Cup run that eventually ended against Liverpool.
Yeah, I played in that game. I played in that tournament. We should have won that. We should have won that game against Liverpool and got through. And if you'd have got through to the final, which was at Hampden, we would have won that tournament. And I had a lot of memories, great memories of scoring goals for Celtic. I remember missing one. Well, I wasn't a miss. I just hit the bar. I jumped and headed this ball, and it should have went in the net, but I hit the bar. If I'd have scored with that goal, it would have made a heck of a difference. That was at Parkhead. But then we went through to Liverpool and played at Anfield, and another ball come up, and I flicked it from. I was jumping with Big Yates, the Liverpool centre half, and I flicked the ball over his head, and Bobby Lennox had ran from behind me, past me, and put the ball in the net. The referee gave offside.
I know.
And that would have put us through to the final, and I have no doubt in my mind we would have beat the Germans in the final. But that group of players that Big Jock had, and the team that went on to win the Cup at Lisbon was just super.
And I'm just wondering, do a lot of people listening to this, fully understand the role that you played in the 66-67 season? Because just before you got injured against Aberdeen, you'd scored 36 goals by Christmas time?
That's correct. And I finished top goal scorer, and I never kicked a ball after December the 27th, I think it was, up at Aberdeen. And I finished top goal scorer in Scotland. And my goal tally was 36 36, I think it was. And Stevie Chalmers and Bobby Lennox had both of them had 30 odd goals, maybe 34 or 35. And Willie Wallace also, although he had scored a few for Hearts and had come to join us. And all four of us were up in the 30s, and I had the top goals and a goal scorer, and I hadn't kicked a ball since the December of the year before.
Yeah.
December 66.
Mm-hmm.
It was heartbreaking, but I've got over it now, although you're reminding me all about it now again.
Sorry, Joe, sorry. If I'm going to make you down the dumps, I'm going to ask you one more question about it and then we'll move on. Joe, what was it like to go to Lisbon with a team and not get on? Did it affect you?
Yes, it was horrible. It was the worst experience, it was the worst feeling. I mean, worst feeling that I wasn't on the park, but make no mistake, I was, so delighted for the boys, and I was crying with them, but I was crying for both me not being there and them winning, And I'll always remember Big Jock in the dressing room. He kind of saw me standing, and he's Joe, and but he said, "Get your ass out of here," So I said to him, and I knew he was telling me, "Will you go and hide?" Because I was feeling rotten, not being in the team, I've not been able to play. So I asked him for a jersey to change with the big centre half of Inter Milan, and he said, so he gave me a jersey, and I went to the dressing room of Inter Milan and I had to tap the door, and Herrera came to the door. McBride, yes. I says, Mr. Herrera, can I change it just up for the big centre half, So he rabbited a bit on in Italian, and he got the jersey and he just threw it out to me. Didn't hit me with it, but he just threw it out to me, and he hadn't opened the door, any wider than a half a foot, So then he shut the door. They never come out of that room we were all sitting at the celebration dinner, and halfies were taking bits and pieces of it because we were waiting on them coming. It took them an hour and a half to come, and they come in all dressed up in their suits and their shirts and their ties, and there wasn't a bit out of place. And they just did the meal and were away as quickly as ever. He tore them to ribbons, so he did. Because he thought they were favourites, and they were favourites. But Celtic tore them to ribbons that day.
They gave it Johnston, Tully, Mother, Auld and Hay. And most of the football greats out past the Parkhead skates, born to play football, the Glasgow.
And of course, building on the European Cup final of 1967, you would expect Celtic to go out and win the European Cup every year from now on.
Yeah.
But it didn't actually pan out that way, did it?
I mean, I must admit, I think that the period after 67, particularly in the 70s, as I say, once they started selling off the quality street kids, because my view is that Sean Fallon brought together most of the Lions, so the bulk of one European Cup winning team. He then brought together all of the quality street kids, which should have been another one European Cup winning team. Billy McNeil says that the quality street kids were undoubtedly more talented than the Lions, and really we should have, the 67 shouldn't have been the pinnacle for Celtic. It should have been the start of a dynasty, because they had, if you look at, there's a fantastic picture that I know that the Lions gave Sean on his 90th birthday, and it's a picture of the squad, basically the full squad. And you've no doubt seen it before. It's got your very young Kendall Gleeson in the front row, Danny McGrain, Davy Hay, George Connelly, all these guys that would be Lou McCarry's. With the Lions are all still there, no one's been sold, Ronnie Simpson's still not retired. So you've got the best squad picture ever at Celtic Park, and you think that should have been the basis for something absolutely so special for so many years. And I know they got to the final again in 70, I know they got to a couple of semi-finals, but really they underachieved from then on, and there was a couple of reasons for it. One of them was the selling off of players and but there was a gradual disenchantment as well. I think that money became a big issue, after 67 with the players, and Celtic really didn't do enough in that respect. You know, and I know that's a view of Sean and of some of the players as well, that they should have, after 67, played a big testimonial. I think Stevie Chandler's suggestion, which was a good one, I think, would have been to say, OK, we'll play Di Stefano's testimonial against Real Madrid. We want a return match at Celtic Park. A big benefit of the game, the Lions get a big payoff, and they're sorted financially, but as it was, money became an issue, and that will be something you'll no doubt cover in the 70s podcast. But it became a bit of a sticking point in an area that, because almost as soon as they came back from Lisbon, Tommy Gemmell found out that summer that all the players have been paid £40 except Billy McNeil, who's getting £50 a week. And so right from the start, he reported that back to the dressing room. Right from the start, money's an issue. You know, whereas previously it had been this fantastically united camp. And people say that there were better teams after Lisbon, that Lisbon Lions wasn't Celtic's best 11, that 68-69 is talked about as being a better team, certainly a better squad, when you had the Maccaris pushing in, the Dalglishs on the fringes of things, and McGrains. You know, at that point John Hughes had found consistency. Charlie Gallagher, who again is a very underestimated figure, was, you know, really helping out the team as well. So people say that was a better team, that other teams should have been better 11s, but they just never achieved what the Lions did for a variety of reasons, and most of them avoidable, unfortunately, and that's a real pity, that Celtic could have been like an Ajax or a Bayern Munich who won 3-4 European Cups in a row, but they allowed that to slip away, and I think that's a real scandal in a sense, because you see, well, Celtic went on and won 9 in a row in the years after Lisbon. They did, but they could have done so much more, and I think that's a real shame that they didn't. And it was nothing to do with Jock Stein or the players or Sean Fallon.
Do you think losing to Dynamo Kiev the following year so quickly, going out of the competition so quickly, had something to do with that too, Stephen?
I think there was a bit of a hangover. I mean, I think a lot of Jock Stein, I think, came out alive when the players came back for pre-season. He said, you know, for some of you, football will never be the same again. And I think there was a struggle to get themselves going again. To be fair, that Dynamo Kiev, again, is one of these great Eastern European teams. They were a great side at the time, and I know Jimmy Johnson was always absolutely adamant that the referee got at there, you know, with no doubt whatsoever in the way leg that he was bent, that the referee rigged the game, and that was simple as that. He said it was the worst I think he'd ever seen. But it was definitely, there was a problem, I think, even part of the way through that season. They had to have almost like a crisis meeting and get together, because a lot of bad feeling came out of the racing club games with the fining of the players after that, because especially the way they fined the players, they fined them £250, which, given what I've just mentioned about the weekly wage between 40 and 50, was massive money. And they fined them this money regardless of whether you were guilty. So regardless of whether you were, you know, Tommy Gemmell and you'd kicked someone in the nether regions, or you were someone who was completely guiltless, you were fined £250. And so, like Jim Craig, who considered himself completely guiltless, was very resentful about that, and justifiably, you'd have to say. And so you came away with this bad feeling, and it just lingered, as you say, going from the previous pre-season and the previous build-up to the 66-67 season had been that fantastic summer trip to Bermuda and USA and Canada, where they just forged these bonds like a family. And then you just get this little things where you know, there's a feeling that the club are going against them, a racing club, and, you know, you've got Tommy Gemmell hearing that Billy McNeil's getting paid more than the rest of the squad. Because by this point, you've got to remember that Jinky was third in the Ballon d'Or voting for the 68. Tommy Gemmell was, I think, in the top 5 or 6. So these guys were the stars of Europe at this point, and they really were huge names throughout football. And they would have known their value. They would have known that they could go elsewhere and earn a lot more money, and maybe be appreciated a little bit more, and certainly financially. And so you can understand there was a bit of resentment, because they had become big stars, and yet things were almost, they were being treated. And so Jock Stein was, I think it was master-servant relationship was always the phrase used. That never changed. The money didn't change a great deal, and so the resentment started to seep into the squad, and that was a real pity, because again, had they played a big game, shown a token of appreciation, had they maybe just tweaked the way the club did the wages in terms of being so bonus heavy, then they could have avoided a lot of the problems that came after that.
Mm-hmm.
From 1960 to 1970, Celtic had many variations to the change kits through this decade. 1960 to 1964, the Celtic away shirt was white in the front and back, accompanied with green sleeves. A green collar and a green shamrock on the left breast made up the look of the away kit. From 1964 to 1965, seen an all-green Celtic away shirt make its return, which was finished off with a white collar trim, white cuffs in the sleeves, all green shorts and all white socks. From 1965 to 1966, the only change to the away kit was a subtle change with white socks changing to green. From 1966 to 1967, seen more subtle changes. Out went the white collar trim and white cuffs to leave a completely all-green shirt. From 1967 to 1968, we wore the all-green shirt, white shorts and white socks. From 68 to 70, the only change to the away kit was to bring back the green socks, which had two thin white hoops at the top, just below the knee. From 68 to 70 again, Celtic had two third kits which were used very sparingly. 68 to 69 seen an all-white away kit, with the only touches being two thin green hoops on the collar and cuffs. The other third away kit from this time was an all-yellow kit.
For us to see, for the play football the Celtic way.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the news for the 30th of July 1966 on Radio England, your most cherished pirate radio station. There's still a lot of bad vibes coming from Vietnam as the Yanks carry on making war. But let's not get bogged down in that, man. No, today's headline, as West Germany's so-called Iron Fortress of a team lay in ruins at Wembley. England's won the World Cup!
And you talked there about the Intercontinental Club Cup against Racing from Argentina, and that whole escapade that happened at that time probably could have been avoided.
Yeah, and it wasn't a one-off. I mean, again, you tend to see that in isolation as just this, you know, Celtic were unlucky to play this team who were just, you know, in a savage mood and were out to cause destruction. But if you notice, in the games after that, there were, you know, Manchester United had, after they won the European Cup, I think it was Estudiantes they played, and they had Nobby Stiles was sent off, and George Best sent off, and it became, again, a bit of a farce, because the Estudiantes, I think it was, played exactly the same way, maybe not quite as blatant as Racing Club, but went out, and it was huge for them. I think even now the successor to the Intercontinental Cup, the Club World Cup, I sometimes do that for FIFA, and it's always much bigger in South America. South Americans really do care about it. It's their big thing, whereas the European Cup has always been a bigger thing for the European teams. So it was massive for them, and I think that there were factors at play there in South America which Celtic were completely unaware of. And I think it really did, the brutality that Racing Club approached it with really took them by surprise. Sean said he really couldn't understand even years later. He said these guys, they weren't just kickers, they could play, they were international players, they all had ability, and when they tried to play, it's like Atletico Madrid as well, years later, they showed that when they wanted to play, they could play, but they obviously had made a calculated decision before the match that they weren't as good as Celtic, and that the only way they could do it was to just use any means necessary. And the Racing Club players have confirmed this in subsequent interviews themselves, that the only way they could do it is to just drive Celtic to distraction with their constant spitting, you know, their kicking, their elbowing, their punching, their hair pulling, and it worked, because by the time the third game came around, and you can debate whether it was the right thing to do, but I think you can certainly see where Jock Stein was coming from and not wanting to be seen to be running away. it probably put
There's no team would have went home. No team would have went home.
No, I know, and that's it as well. He would have seen that his team were better. He would have known that the way Racing Club had approached it showed they were scared, because he must have seen that they must have known that they weren't as good. So he would have felt, right, if we can play them fair and get a chance, we can beat them. And that's all he saw. He was a football manager thinking there was a football match to be won. And you can't blame him for that. But they were never going to get a fair match. I think they were never going to get the chance to play a football match. And I think the problem was, by that point, really the patience had been worn thin. And I think the line before the third game was that the time for politeness was over. And the players took that a little too literally, some of them, but you can't blame them. And then obviously the consequence of that is, as has been confirmed later, that Jock Stein doesn't get a knighthood because of it, because he's seen as almost kind of having sent them out to play in this way, which is completely wrong. Although he said the time for politeness is over, he was raging at the Tommy Gemmels and the like for losing the plot, and I think it was a really low moment. There was talk kind of behind the scenes that he might even resign after that, which seems ridiculous given that it was just a few months after Lisbon. But that was how much it affected him, was that he was so low that there were even rumours that he could step aside, because he was just so disconsolate after everything that had happened. And I know that Bob Kelly said it was his worst moment in football. And you think that what they'd achieved to get there, and you're losing an intercontinental cup final. It's not the end of the world, but that was how low and how much it affected the team and the backroom staff at that time.
I remember reading Tom Campbell's book, The Tears in Argentina, a few years back, and I remember sitting chuckling in bed reading it, thinking to myself, if I was reading a book like this, I could actually believe this is fiction. Here's this historical account of what actually happened at the time, and it was so ridiculous for it to be a true story. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just crazy, and the thing is, it's just a case of, can you be comfortable doing that? Because I know that was the one thing that he said, I could never have won that way, and I don't think that they would ever, because that was that same French magazine that praised Celtic for, been the best thing that ever happened to football, basically, said, that all Racing Club had done, they'd made themselves the champions of thuggery and play acting, and that was it. That was what they would become world champions in. But they didn't care. All that mattered was they won. And in terms of within Argentina, within the rivalries, as you know from in Tom Campbell's book, it was so important within their little rivalries in the country that they had now got one up on the other teams in Buenos Aires, and that was all that mattered. And all the players got a car for doing the necessary. And and maybe they feel the end justified the means. I don't know, but after a while, European teams stopped playing in that game. It was discontinued for quite a long time because it became this recurring farce. That almost every year the South American teams would come up and just kick their way through the game, would injure players, would get players sent off, and it just players. I think in the early 70s, during that Ajax and Bayern Munich period, they just stopped playing in it because it just wasn't worth the hassle. It really wasn't worth the hassle. But Celtic, it's all very well and nice, but Celtic should have withdrawn after the second game. Funny enough, in away goals these days, Celtic would have won after the second game. The way it works these days, they would have won. But it's all fine saying that, and you can imagine at the time Jock Stein thinking, we can beat this team. If it comes down to a football match, we will beat this team. Just unfortunate it didn't work out that way. Do you know what's amazing about this decade, though? Here we are. We've just talked right through to 1968, and we win the league. It's part of our 9-in-a-row run, and we're not even talking about any league matches whatsoever, because that's just a foregone conclusion. We're talking about games, against Argentinian teams. We're going to talk about AC Milan. It's all the big glory games at this time, and when I think back of some of the previous decades that we've covered here for the Street Podcast, and you're scratching around for a Scottish Cup final against Aberdeen to talk about,
It's amazing, and as you say, at that time those were celebrated like European Cup finals. They were treated like heroes. Because it was. I remember reading the Amber in the Sun about the 7-1 game, and it said there was almost like a love sickness about the Celtic players of the 50s. They were all beloved figures, you know, the McPhails and the Tullys especially, obviously, but the, you know, Fallons and all these guys that they were absolutely loved, and yet you look at what they achieved compared to the guys who would come after. And the funny thing is that it becomes, when you raise you know, the expectations like that, there's talk about in 1968-69 when the Celtic get to the European Cup semi-final, win a treble, of fans saying, oh, it's a bit of a failure this season.
Exactly, we only won the treble.
They can see what is possible with this team, and they've become a little bit spoiled maybe as well, but that they know that you know, they've seen that this could be another Lisbon season, and that perhaps the team is better. But yeah, you think back even 5 years' time, it would have been unthinkable that Celtic would have won a treble and been in the semi-final of the European Cup. But that has become expected, and not even expected, but some people are saying, almost kind of grumbling about it. And it's as well, it became, you don't look forward to the, you know, you go into the 70s, but the summer of 1970 after, they've lost the fire, there's just absolute gloom around the place. And yet, they had won the league at an absolute canter in 69-70, they won it in March, and they were so far on top, they destroyed Leeds United, so they were by far the best team in Europe, and yet the whole place was just gloom. It was just absolute desolation about Celtic Park, and it just shows how far it had come, that losing a European Cup final, being the second best team in Europe, and that was how far Celtic had come, that they were just so depressed about this.
And then, of course, after my dad came to Glasgow and had the word with Stanton, the main thing then was get it recorded. So he went down to London to record the two Celtic song, Johnny Thompson song, and two other titles. Kathleen So Fair and Bright was the B-side of the John Thompson song, and I always think, quite ironically, the B-side of the Celtic song was An Irishman's Dream. And how appropriate, because that's what Celtic were. They were Walfrid's dream. And also, it was quite a coincidence that was in the back of them, you know. Anyway, the whole thing was done at a studio in London called Marble Arts Studio, which was owned and run by Pi Records at the time, who, as you remember, were one of the biggest recording companies in the world, sadly no longer with us. But it was very much an economy production. I mean, there was only a sound engineer, two musicians, an accordionist and a drummer, and my dad. But the irony there again was, like so many things associated with Celtic and the club, the drummer just wasn't any drummer. Any accordionist. It was a guy called Jack Emblow, who became arguably the greatest jazz accordionist in the world. And Jack Emblow, for maybe listeners of the older generation that they call here, was the man responsible for one of the longest running BBC music programmes called Sing Something Simple on Radio 2. It was on for about 35 years. And he also wrote incidental music for Last of the Summer Wine, Allo, Bergerac. And probably his least popular number is Under Paris Skies, which I read recently is in the top 50 funeral songs, but I don't think he takes much credit for that. But he was the accordionist, and as I say, very little spent on it.
So this was 1961 now, right?
61. And then, of course, Emblow then went on from there. He was the accordionist on the All You Need Is Love telecast of the Beatles, and a very distinguished musician. But he was just working as a session musician then for Pi. And fortunately, anybody who listens to it can see that technically he's an excellent player. Now they rehearsed all the four numbers in the afternoon, but they still had no definite second verse. They kicked a few things around, and my dad said, you can't just keep repeating that first verse, which was essentially the Belfast version of it. Because you've got to have a second verse for a bit of variety. And so he left the studio with nothing really definite, and he went into a restaurant called Simpson's in the Strand. And in the best Hollywood tradition, he said, we need to get something down the paper. He took one of the menus, and he said, key thing is simple, it's got to be Glasgow, it's got to be Scotland, we've got to make it Celtic song. And he wrote that second verse. Sure, they're the best damn team in Scotland, and the players all are grand. We'll support the Celtics, they are the finest in the land. We'll be there to give the boys a cheer when the league flag flies, and it cheers us up when we know the Scottish Cup is coming home to rest at paradise.
Fantastic.
They went into the studio with that, and
the rest is history.
That's the rest history. And then, of course, the record was, both records were released in early October 1961, and as you read in some of the little bits and pieces that I sent you, the reaction to the song was very negative, very unwelcoming.
Tell me more about this banning. Why did they want to ban it?
Nobody had heard the record, other than on Radio Luxembourg, and there was nothing offensive or dodgy in it at all. But what was happening in Scotland at the time, if you look back, was there had been trouble at football grounds. The Celtic supporters, unfortunately, a tiny element of them who, don't represent the club and never will, had been involved in trouble at Falkirk and Dundee. There had been trouble at other matches, in fairness. And actually, Scottish newspapers were carrying articles saying things like, crowds are falling because of hooliganism. And one statistic they gave, there was a Celtic match at Falkirk, I think it was an all ticket, 21,000, Chris, and only 14,000 turned up, and they attributed this to the fact that people were worried about violence in the crowd. Anyway, the records have just been released, they've just hit the streets, and the Glasgow papers were carrying headlines which are a bit over-dramatic. I mean, one of them never even called it the Celtic song, it referred to it as that song,
right.
And that was in italics or heavy print. And then it stated in the article that this song was already condemned by Glasgow police. And then they quoted an unidentified police spokesman who was very busy at this time. He said, we've enough trouble with football supporters. This song will only make things worse. But it's not even in the shops yet. And I think it was the Scottish Daily Mail who carried the headline, "Police condemn new Celtic rallying song." And this police spokesman was quoted again, but this time he was talking about the John Thompson song, which nobody could take offence at. It was a very sensitive, respectful ballad about a wonderful Celtic goalkeeper who had been a born-again Christian, who had been a model of good behaviour and just, respected throughout the country. They said that the Johnny Thompson song, "We've enough trouble at the moment with football supporters again. This will only help inflame them." You've got this vision of people running up and down the streets shouting and bawling and getting inflamed, and it was ridiculous. Well, it escalated from that. It started off as condemnation, and then the next thing it became a possible ban. And it said, one of the headlines read, as you know, "Banning songs puzzles the Celtic fans." It was fait accompli. It was already banned. Sort of thing in their eyes. And it was scheduled to be played early October in a meaningless Glasgow Cup tie against Queen's Park at Celtic Park. And there was an article in the paper that day saying it was going to be played. It was a dreadful evening, as I recall it. 8,000 people turned up, but it wasn't played.
This was at Celtic Park itself?
Yeah. Celtic Park itself. This is its first. This was scheduled to be its first public airing, Chris. And then the next day, there was an article saying, why wasn't it played? So my dad said, somebody's obviously not delivered the record or whatever. But Clifford Stanton said an interesting thing. He said, maybe the Celtic club decided that, they were having second thoughts about playing it. And I don't think that's so far off the mark, Chris, because if somebody in the papers has said, this is controversial, we're condemning this is going to cause trouble, obviously the Celtic director at the time would have to think about this, and then obviously when they reflected on it and heard it, realised it was just a rousing football song. The response to the criticism that it was getting is hard. I mean, if the papers write the words condemned and they write the word banned, well, you don't really have any comeback. But fortunately, Celtic had representing them at the time, or at least their supporters association, a great man called Hugh Delaney. He was a very distinguished secretary of the Celtic Supporters Association, and his quote to the papers was, "We feel the Celtic song will help cut down trouble rather than increase it. We would rather our supporters sang this than some of the other songs, which are more provocative."
It puts into perspective some of the comments you get today about having to play qualifying games to get into the Champions League, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's you have to adjust with things. There's no point in holding this. It's the old thing about every manager that goes to Aberdeen always says there's no point in holding me by the standards of Ferguson in the early 80s, and it's not going to happen. There's no point in really holding Neil Lennon to the standards that were set during this period, because again, getting to the last 16 is a fantastic achievement, and the way he's gone about certain games, okay, again, if you're talking about Duke Prague, and the team was almost embarrassed by that, and the players were almost embarrassed by it, as I say, you would not blame against certain teams if we'd get a result. We were so unlucky not to get a result away in Barcelona, and we played fairly defensively at home, okay, two up front, but, fairly defensively. But you have to take your hat off them, because and I think Celtic fans are realistic. I think that's the thing. We have adjusted over time to appreciate that this is the way we need to approach games, and to know our place and the way football is developed, because that's the thing. Back then, it was all gate money. That was, and Celtic could compete, and that was what mattered, and we were getting big crowds, and we could compete. And these days, you just don't have a chance, and that's why you've got ridiculous situations like Southampton taking one of our best players.
Aye.
For $12.5 million. It's ridiculous in a sense, but yet there's almost like a shrugging of the shoulders. I've not seen much outrage about that. It's just a kind of weary, that's just where we are, and we're just in the shadow of this absolute colossus, the English Premiership, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just, you just have to adopt the right policies, and I think everyone would say that Celtic are doing the right thing by signing these young guys, accepting that they don't see Celtic as the be-all and end-all for them, and they probably will want to move on to England eventually. But, just getting the most out of them, and while they're there, making sure they enjoy it, making sure they love the club. You might be lucky, you might turn up a Henrik Larsson again, who just loves Scotland, is happy here, and is happy to stay, and you just hope for that. But I think that's all you can do, is, the hand you're dealt, just go with as best you can, and I think Celtic are doing that just now. It's just when you look back to these decades, you wish you could kind of go on an even footing, because if a Lisbon happened these days, you think there's any chance Jinky be there start of next season? Do you think there's any chance that Bobby Murdoch would still been there? Do you think there's any chance?
Just keep going. Just name them all.
Exactly, that's it. And you never would have got as far, because again, after the previous season, would have been, an English club would have come in with massive money. So it's just different times, and you can pine for them, but it's just the way football's gone, unfortunately. And we say the same about, as I say, we're talking about these Eastern European clubs. Celtic are really in exactly the same situation. We're now, and the TV money is king, and we just have to adjust to that. And as I say, I think we're doing as well as we possibly can in the circumstances. But when you look back, it's such a great era to look back to, and to see. And it's the only frustration I've got is that I think we could have done even more. I really think that we could have been the dominant force of the late 60s and early 70s, because we had a good enough squad, a good enough manager, a good enough setup. The whole club was working so well, and you had, this arguably the greatest manager of all time. You had Sean Fallon, who I would argue is one of the greatest talent spotters, if not the greatest talent spotter of all time, certainly in Britain, going out and just providing this constant supply of talent. This, then you've got Stein motivating them. You've got.
When you look at the end of the decade itself, Stephen, when they walloped Rangers 4-0 in the Scottish Cup to win the treble, and you saw that this team that had conquered Europe and played the creme de la creme in Europe, but still, as you mentioned earlier on, you had the quality street gang coming in behind the scenes and starting to replace some of the lands that had enjoyed all that success. Celtic, at the end of 1969, were on top of the world. They were the best team in the world.
They were, yeah, absolutely. And then, it was AC Milan. I think they took them out of the Europe that season, and they were amazed to have done so. They were really, and you think of that now, but they thought they got so lucky in knocking out Celtic, and they felt they'd beaten the best team in Europe and the world, and they were right, because that's what Celtic were at that stage, and they had everything before them. And I know that people will say, and you'll do that more, the Feyenoord was a real turning point in terms of the breaking up of the Lions, but at that point you had this fantastic squad where you had the experience of the Lions. And people forget as well, when the Lions won the European Cup, they weren't an old team. They were the average age was very young, so they had their whole careers ahead of them. Plus, already at the time, Dalglish signed in May '67. George Connelly was in before even Jock Stein arrived. Sean had beaten Jock Stein to sign him, because Jock Stein had wanted them firm on. You had, Davy Hay had come in, 65. You had all these guys who were well in. Daniel McGrain was in. All these guys were ready and waiting to come into the team, and they were getting better and better, and they were learning from the best. They said at that point that the toughest game the first team would play was in training, because they would play these quality street kids, and they said the games were just ferocious. He said, they'd play these games every Friday, and he said that they were absolutely incredible. And I know the quality street kids said that the only chance they had of winning was if Sean was the referee, because they were his boys really, and otherwise the Lions would always find a way of winning. But I mean, when you look at that squad picture, and it's just awesome to see the talent that Celtic had, and we'll never have a better squad. That's just the sad reality. We'll never have anything like that again, because you're talking about just row upon row of world-class players, genuinely world-class players, and guys who would become, all-time greats, and they weren't even in the first team at that stage. It's just absolutely remarkable. And as I say, you wonder what could have been done had they only kept David, because Davy Hay again, he's one. People talk about Ken Dalglish being the kind of sign that Celtic, were giving up and competing in Europe. When they sold Davy Hay, that was as important a moment as anything, because from then on they never really, they were on the slide from that moment. And but these guys, the McCarrys, the Hayes, Dalglishes, if they kept them, you just wonder what could have happened to Celtic in the 70s. And if they just kept those guys alongside the Lions, working together in that kind of atmosphere of competitiveness, but a great atmosphere. I mean, they said it was just the Lions were so good with them. There was never any kind of quality street Lisbon Lions rivalry. There was just a belief that, we need to be at our very best to stay in this team. Whereas the quality street kids had absolute, complete respect for the guys who were trying to knock out.
And what a fantastic way to end the decade. Ending the decade on a high for once.
If you can't end the 60s on a high, then it's a bit of a problem. I've got to say, if I ended the 60s on a depressing note, there'd be something very wrong.
Stephen, I am sitting here with probably about 8 inches of paper in front of me, 1,000 printouts. I have highlighters, I have scribble notes and all the rest of it, and I don't even think we got to a fraction of the topics that we could have talked about during the 60s.
No, I mean, I think probably part of that is down to my waffling right enough, but I mean, in terms of the 60s, you could go on for hours and hours. I mean, it's just an absolute, I mean, you could, as you say, you could have a podcast solely in the early 60s and then about 3 podcasts in the late 60s, and it's just a fascinating time. And as well, it's fascinating enough on the surface of it, then when you scratch below, as with all the decades, I mean, everyone has been like that. There's been just stories that I've not known previously, and they're just absolutely fascinating. It makes you want to go away and read some more. And we're so lucky, I think, as a Celtic support these days, to have things like Celtic Wiki and Celtic Graves that have come up and just added to the whole club's, to the depth of it, the kind of legend, because that's what Celtic's all about. I think when if you're just supporting a team, you could support any team, and you could. Celtic is the history. I think that's what makes Celtic special, and I think milestones like this. Like I always remember the centenary year. That was a real milestone. There were so many histories coming out around that time, and that's when you learn. This is not just a football team. This is part of my own history and my own family's history, and this whole my community's history. And that's what I think 125 has done again. And it's been, it was so great. It was such a great year. The Barcelona and so on. And I think it's a great initiative you've embarked upon here. I know it'll be hard work for you, but every one so far has just been fascinating, and it shows the kind of range of people you've had on, the depth of passion and knowledge. And I think it's terrific. It reflects so well on Celtic, and it's things like the Celtic Wiki and the Celtic Graves. I mean, I've not seen that at any other club. I just think it's things like that just show that we're still special all these years on 125. We're still a special club, and just immense credit to the guys.
There's not another club in the world like this. There isn't one. If you didn't know anything about football, and you were taken from another planet and put on this planet, you were to research what team would you support. I think I'd still support Celtic, and I know that's awful romantic and all the rest, but and everybody will probably be listening to this going, "Oh, for God's sake!" It's absolutely true. You wouldn't get the social aspect.
Absolutely, I mean, I love to, and I'm probably very naive in thinking this, but I love to think of the new signings coming and googling Celtic when they first maybe get approached, and going in the Celtic Wiki, and I love to think of them just starting there and going for hours or whatever, and just falling in love with it bit by bit. And that is no doubt very naive of me to think that, but I just think if you did start reading, you'd never stop. You'd never want to stop. If you were joining Celtic and you went on the Celtic Wiki, for example, or again, whatever Celtic Graves, if they're imagine being a family and one of the early guys who they had been on, and imagine being one of their family and having a guy phoning up saying we want to put on a service to recognise something your father did 120 years ago. I mean,
imagine having fans from all around the world going to graveyards on one day and taking photographs.
Yeah.
Of graveyard. I mean, when I went up to Peter McGonagall's grave here in Cheltenham, you know, I was telling the guys in work, you know, after work I'm going up to a guy that used to play for Celtic, and I'm going to put some flowers on his grave, and they looked at you as if to say, "What planet are you from?" Well,
yeah.
What? And if you don't get it, you don't get it. But if you do get it, it's brilliant.
Absolutely. And that was the one thing I loved about doing, you know, so many things I loved about speaking to Sean for his story was that he got it. He got it right from the start. And I loved the fact that he fell in love with Celtic. With having never ever seen them, just with his dad having been over here for a couple of years after the war, going to see Celtic, coming back, talking about Patsy Gallagher again. And it's all connected. I mean, you like that, all your previous podcast. He comes back. Sean just falls in love with this, and he gets, you know, Jimmy McMenemy's son saves his sister from drowning, and it's just all these romantic little subplots. And then he comes over absolutely infatuated, even before he's ever seen them play, ever been to Glasgow, and he never lost that. He never ever, even after Celtic treated him so badly and sacked him, demoted him, he never ever lost that. He said, you know, if you'd come round and seen me the day after Celtic sacked me, I'd have told you without hesitation I loved Celtic. And that's as nice as it, you know, that is. Just that's what the club does to you, and I think that he always felt grateful. He always, even though he'd given the club so much, he felt grateful for having been a part of it, and that was it. He never stopped being a Celt, and that was what he said. Never stopped being a Celt.
That's magnificent, and it's the colossal of everything that's around the club. Oh, and by the way, in the background there's a team of 11 guys that run out onto a bit of grass and kick a ball about.
Yeah. And I hope that.
Alright, it's March the 4th, and unbelievably on the phone I have one of my father's heroes, the one and only George Connelly. George, how are you today?
I'm fine, Chris. I'm very well, thank you.
So George, you made your debut as a sub against Dunfermline in 1968.
Mr. Stephen told me on the Friday, Chris, I think if I'm honest with you, he says that if Rangers get beat, and they did on the Saturday, you will be playing on the Monday. And I think Rangers got beat one game that season, and it was against Aberdeen. That was my first game, man.
Had you nerves going on, George, or was it just sort of you're too young to have the nerves?
That was it, Chris. I was too young to have any nerves, you know. It was just part of a kind of family thing there. You just stepped in there, and that was it. Mr. Stein gave you so much confidence that if he thought you were good enough, you felt good enough.
68, you played your part in the double header, the League Cup double header against Rangers, and that was your first turnout against them. Is that right?
League Cup double, that's right. It was a six. That was it. At that time, Chris, we played in the sections before, and we played at the Ibrox at the Parkhead, and I played in both games. And in the first game, I think we won 2-0, and the second game was 1-0 at Parkhead. My debut was the 2-0 game at the Ibrox.
Right. And again, same question, overwhelming or no big deal?
Absolutely, it was absolutely. I took it off at about 20 minutes to go, I think it was. And the stitches on my side, I think it was just for the excitement and the atmosphere in the first game, you know.
Is that right, just punctured?
I was just knackered. That was my first game.
George, what was it like? Was there any time during the game where you were standing on the park going, oh my God, I'm playing for Celtic against Rangers at Ibrox?
What I can remember is there was it was a really hot day, and I was quite knackered, and I really hoped the foot was going in. Don't get me wrong there. I was excited, but Mr. Stein thought you were good enough. You felt good enough, you know. So I just went out and done my best, and I didn't take I took a stitch in the side, and that was me to come off there. It was okay. Great day for me.
Was there a different atmosphere going out to play Rangers, even in the dressing room and the pre-match team talk by Mr. Stein and things like that?
I think there's always a different atmosphere in the games, Chris. You know, I think they're one of the biggest derbies in the world, if not the best derby in the world. I think there was always something about the Rangers games, you know. To me, anyway, there was, and it was always Celtic versus Rangers was always a big derby game, you know. So, and I think it's still the same yet.
the most famous goals that you're remembered for came in the 1969 Scottish Cup final, surprise against Rangers, when you scored to make it 3-0.
Oh, well, I've talked about that for years, Chris, so I can remember it quite well, and I've actually got the film somewhere. Actually, Rangers were favourites for that game, you know, and I think Jake was out for that game and John Hughes was out for the game, you know, they were two really big players for us at the time, and Rangers were favourites, and it was a big day for us, you know, a big day for me. But I remember the goal well, it was just one of these things, the goalkeeper kicked the ball to John Gregg, and he tried to pass it, and I just intercepted it, and that was it, and I got in, I was lucky again, so it was a great day for Celtic that day. I think there were 4 chances Celtic to score with the scoring.
Was that the game where you done the keepy-uppies in front of the Rangers supporters as well, George?
No, that was a 3-1 game. I think Celtic Park was getting renovated that time, Chris, and we played the game at Hampden, and I think it was a 3-1 game on Saturday morning, if I remember right. It was just a bit of show, you know, it was Saturday. Yeah.
George, what was the coaching staff like back in those early days?
Sean Fallon was the really good influence on me, and there was Nelly Mochan and Willie Fenley. Willie Fenley took the young players like myself, Davey, Kenny, Lee, and we maybe did a bit of training with him, and had a big game behind the goals, and Sean would maybe come out, maybe the gaffer would come out sometimes, Stephen. Sometimes the first team would be up at the battlefield, you know, when the reserve would be down at that, training behind the goals. So, the influence, Sean had a great influence in our office at the time. I think he was the assistant manager at the time, so he dealt mostly with the reserves. And, it was actually ideal for he had a great way with us, so it was well liked, and he liked us and we liked him, and that was the right one. It was good. Celtic trained like commandos. They were great trainers there. That was one of the secrets of the Celtic team. They were all great trainers. Everybody asked me about the trainers. The Lisbon Lions were terrific trainers, and it rubbed off on all the youngins. And the Stephen was great at trainers. And I remember running around the park and running around the track at Parkhead, and Chunky turned into him and says, I think the gaffer stays up all night and thinks of all these things. You know, the different training methods we had. So, as far as the training goes, it was Celtic training. Celtic were all, it was terrific training. They all trained hard. You couldn't go in one morning and say, oh, we're going to have an easy day a day, because it wasn't like that. Monday maybe, and maybe a Friday. Yes. Everybody got a ball every single day. You trained with a ball every day. That was a tool you tried, the ball.
Yes.
You went with that every day. You know, you made sure you were super fit.
Yes.
That's one thing with the Celtic. But they won the 9 in a row. They were all great trainers, and I used to watch them, and I looked after them, all the reserves. Great training was better than some of the Premier League games.
George, obviously you're regarded as one of the quality street gang, you know, the likes of yourself and Davy Hay, Lou McCarry and stuff coming through. What was it like to be playing with players like that?
Well, we had a great reserve team just at that time. Myself, Davy, Kenny, Lee, Paul Wilson, John Gorman, Davy Carnack, Pat McMahon was there, and it was a great team to play in. I think we won a league a lot, we won a few cups as well, so, and there was actually a time at Parkhead where you could have fielded 2 Premier League sides if you get my man.
Yeah.
2 sides there, and you wouldn't know what team would have won.
It's amazing when you think back to the talent that Celtic had at that stage.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, especially you coming off the back of the Lisbon Lions and stuff, and still here was this hugely talented team. It just didn't seem to run out for those 9 years, sure didn't.
That's right. It was like a conveyor belt of talent coming through, Chris. That's right. It was awesome at the time, and if you were getting in that first team at the time, you were a lucky person, you know. There were so much players trying to get into the side, and everybody was desperate to play for Celtic and desperate to get a jersey on at the time.
And I hope that of this history that never ever leaves, that it never stops being important to the young fans coming up, that they always feel the need to go back. They don't see it as being black and white footage and colourless and not important, that they do go back beyond the Henrik Larsson history, and they go back way, and they listen to these podcasts and they watch, the Celtic history videos and DVDs and read the books, because it is without the history, we aren't as special. We aren't the special club that we are. But that is so important, and I hope it's never ever lost, because it's just so central to what we are as a club.
Stephen Sullivan, well put. That was fantastic. And thanks very much for coming on here and trying to do justice to the 1960s. Thank God it was you and not me.
I know. I'm sure there'll be complaints. I know I've missed something, and a lot of, it's such a difficult decade to do justice to, but I appreciate you asking me on. Thanks again, and I know it's hopefully doing the Sean book has given a slightly and different perspective, because as I say, I know if it was simply down to me, there'd be much better candidates, but it's been enjoyable again, Chris, speaking to you, and as I say, well done on the other podcast and to all the guys involved, because it's been a great series.
Stephen, before you go, I need to ask you to nominate a charity to benefit from the donations to the Celtic History podcast. Who are you going to choose?
I'm going to choose just the Prince and Princess of Wales Hospice in Glasgow. I think it's maybe getting renamed to the Glasgow Hospice. And yeah, just for personal, if anyone's ever been unlucky enough to kind of come in contact with that, it's just an absolutely fantastic place. I remember them actually coming to my school not long after and speaking about it, and been really moved by the work they did, and then coming into contact with it through one of my family later in life. And when you've got someone in a situation where there's no hope of saving them through a hospital anymore, to take them away from machines and bleeping, hospitals and all the noise and the atmosphere that's there, to somewhere where you really do get so well looked after, and you've got people there who just care about you so much, and people who want to make really difficult days so much better. It is really a fantastic place. I would encourage anyone that's to research it, and it's right in the heart of Glasgow, and I think it's got a lot of very Glaswegian values to it. So
absolutely,
that would be the one I would nominate.
Fantastic, Stephen. Great choice. Absolutely great choice. So, if anybody wants to follow Stephen Sullivan on Twitter, your Twitter address is what, sir?
It's Sullivan SK. I can't guarantee you'll get very much from me, because I very, very rarely tweet. I mean, most of the things we've been doing a lot, as you'll know, through Sean Fallon book, the Sean Fallon book page, which is Sean Fallon Celt. But yeah, you're more welcome to follow me from my one post every 2 months at Sullivan SK. I'll maybe start doing more. I really need to get into it more, to be honest.
There you go. We'll see you in the end.
Gregor Kyle was my Twitter guru. He was giving me a lot of advice. So, but it's funny. I don't tweet personally at all. I'll put out little photos on Sean's site now and again and little things. But I'll need to get into it more. I really will. You get with the times.
Well, when are you releasing the damn book? That's what we all want to know.
I know. Well, the book is written. It's been written for a little while. They're really just production. They want the family are very happy with it, thankfully, which was a great relief. And they've been absolutely fantastic all the way through. The publishers seem very happy with it, which is great. So it'll be out. It's been nudged back a little bit, unfortunately, to October, just to really get all the production as perfect as we possibly can, and get as many great photos in, and just get everything spot on with it. So we'll be having some kind of event in Glasgow and Sligo as well.
Fantastic.
We'll do something in Sligo, and it's hopefully it'll be worth waiting for. Sorry, it's kind of taken as long as it has, but.
So you'll obviously come on Lost Boys and have a wee natter about that closer to the time, of course.
I'd be delighted to, Chris, if you have me. I mean, you're not put off after twice already, but no, I'll be more than happy to. It's been great speaking to you again, and thanks a lot for having me on.
Be my pleasure, so would, Stephen. Enjoyed it as usual. Thanks so much for coming on, and really appreciate it. Great stuff. Well, there you are, folks. That's the end of Chapter 7. 3 hours this time. That's just getting ridiculous, so it is. Special thanks, of course, goes to Stephen Sullivan, whose book on John Fallon will, of course, be out later on in the year. And check out the little write-up on the History Podcast this week, and you'll find the link to Amazon where you can pre-order the book. Brilliant stuff again. Steve was just perfect for this because he had to do all the research for the Sean Fallon book, and only had to do a wee bit of brushing up on his homework. So usual thanks to the Human Torpedo, Chris from the Paradise Report, Pat from Half the World Away podcast, Stuart from the CelticShirt.co.uk, Ian Young, Bertie Auld, George Connelly, Bobby Lennox, and of course the late Joe McBride. Thanks to Kelly from Stonehouse, Harper from the Homeboys, Brummy Boy, Jeanette Findlay, Terry, Dick, the Wakes, and Charlie and the Boys for the music, the Parrot for doing the interviews. This list is just getting longer and longer and longer. Just shows you how many people are involved in putting together these history podcasts, and that of course brings me to the donations. So as a wee reward for everybody, as I say every week, for putting all the time and effort into it, send us a £5, £1, 50p, 20 quid if you can afford it. The donations are starting to creep up, but they sort of tailed away last week, and your work's not done. It's the end of the month, you all get paid. Throw us a few quid so that we can make it worthwhile to donate to the charities. And this week's charity is a hospice in Glasgow. Come on, if nothing can move you to donate to charity, it's a hospice in Glasgow. And you can find that donate button, of course, on hailhailmedia.com. Just look for the Celtic History Podcast and you'll find it there. All the money goes to charity. Not one single penny will be taken by any of the hundreds of people that's been involved in the podcast up to now. Not a single cent. So get your donations in and let's make a difference to all these very worthwhile organisations. Remember, it's not too late to send your little sound bites in. I'm still getting a few of them trickling in, and you can send yours to lostboys@gmail.com. Get on your iPhone, get on your Android, hit your voice recorder, email the file, and you'll be on the History Podcast. You'll be on the History of Celtic Podcast. That's great. So next week we move into the 70s, and no doubt it'll be another 2.5, 3 hours, because I have St Anthony from the Celtic Underground Podcast, who does all that fantastic stuff on the 70s for their website and writes about all the players. And yes, we do talk about Count Douglas, and it is just great. I've already started to mix it, I've started to listen back to it, and you're in for a feast again. Also have a few more wee players lined up. So don't miss the Celtic History Podcast. It'll probably be out next weekend, but it might be to the later part of the weekend, because I've got some more stuff going on at the moment. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed it. You've made it through 3 hours. You can make it through anything. Also remember, anybody that's travelling on supporters buses or things like that, drop us a wee email, send us a tweet, let us know if you're playing the podcast over the tannoys, and we'll give you a wee shout out. There you go. Do a CSC. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. My name is Chris McGuigan. You're listening to the Celtic History Podcast. Playing us out are your confessions.
I graduated from the old Hun End round to Celtic End, when I was old enough to go myself, right in the middle of the jungle. And one of my best memories, or possibly worst memories, was at a Hearts game, right in the middle of the jungle, bouncing as high as I could, looking across during the bounce to see if I was higher than anybody, and I was, and then I smacked my head in the television gantry. And then the bounce died down, so I thought, oh, no one's seen it. So I kept on bouncing, pretending to be hard. And of course, some young wag from the back of the jungle shouted, "Sir Heat, big man!"
My favourite Celtic memory, despite being a lifelong Celtic supporter and seeing the team numerous times in England, it took me till 2001 to finally make the trip to Paradise. The feeling I had when I reached the top of the stairs and walked to my seat for the first time will never ever leave me, and I sat down in anticipation of a comfortable beating of Motherwell. Then, as I scanned through the team lineups, I discovered to my horror that Motherwell had the two Andy Gorhams playing in goals for them that day. True to form, despite Celtic dominating the game, the Flying Pig was revelling in the limelight and was pulling back the years with a stunning display. As the game drew to a close, and I was certain that my first game was going to end in disappointment, we won a free kick on the edge of the area, right below where my seat was. Up stepped the magician, Lubo, and curled the ball into the top corner. A finish so good that neither of the Gorhams could get near it. Perfect. Hail, hail.
So back in the 90s, Tullochurry, we had our own wee supporters club called the Tullochurry Moravchik Celtic Supporters Club, and all through the season we stopped at 10. We went up in a wee van every week, or a wee minibus, whatever we could get our hands on. So that was the Lubos, the Tullochurry Moravchik, right? So fast forward to Flag Day, after the following season, after stopping at 10, we decided to share a bus with the Roy Milne posse. So, being Flag Day, it's a big bus, we're all heading up, so the two buses are sharing, and the Mickey Finns are passing around the back of the bus, and the Fat Frogs, and all that kind of stuff, and somebody handed me a spliff. The blow wouldn't really be my scene, but Flag Day, I'll take a few puffs and that, no? Took a few puffs too many, gets to the stadium, everybody's away for a pint. I decide, look, I'm going to go and get something to eat, a wee bit of wonder, no feeling too great. I'll just head into the stadium early, I say. So I get up to my seat, and I'm taking a pure whitey by this stage. So I thought, nah, I can't do this, I've got to get out of here. There's a total one of them, just got to leave the scene, like, you know. So I heads back out, the ground's not even half full yet, flags, nothing's been done. Jumps in a taxi, says, "Hall, take me back to Tullochurry." Paid the man up front to take me back to Tullochurry. So by the time I gets there, I'm feeling a wee bit not too bad, so I just heads for a few pint. I misses all the flag going up and all that, but that wouldn't be on to me. After the game, back in the bus, there was a big rammy, because our boys from the Tullochurry Moravchik wouldn't want to leave without me, didn't know where I was. But let's just say there was a few words exchanged when they got back to the Red Line to see me gassed. That's my confession.